When a crime is committed, we tend to focus on the criminal, the motive, and the court case. But what about the victims and their loved ones that have had their lives changed forever? And what happens to the person who has to plan a funeral for a murdered child? Who helps a woman who's trying to get away from an abusive partner? The San Mateo County Victim Services Division provides help for victims of violent crimes. And here to talk to us about it is Elise Kuhl from the District Attorney's Victim Services Division. Elisa, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
So, what are some of the services that the county can offer to victims?
The Victim Services Division is in place to serve victims of all types of crime. We provide assistance regardless of whether or not there is a suspect who has been arrested, identified, or charged. So if you're a victim of a crime, I urge you to contact our office for assistance. We have 15 victim advocates, 2 of which are specialized in domestic violence. And we have 4 advocates who work specially with victims of crime in trying to get restitution orders. Last year, we served 6,100 victims of crime.
Wow.
25% of those victims were victims of domestic violence,
Wow.
and 20% were victims of sexual abuse. Our county has recognized that there is a need to serve victims, young children victims of various crimes, and a collaboration between our domestic violence agency, CORA, Rape Trauma Services, and ourselves. We provide specialized empowerment services to victims, to youth victims of crime. So we do what we can to help a youth engage in the criminal justice process and empower them to figure out what's next with their lives.
Wow.
And then we have other important roles, I believe. We spend a lot of time in the criminal justice process, so we go to court with victims, we talk about what to expect, and we spend a lot of time talking about victims' rights and making sure that those rights are enforced.
You know, I think a lot of people don't realize that victims do have rights. What are some of the rights that victims have? And do they vary based on a crime?
That's a great question. What I would say is the rights that victim advocates tend to talk the most about are what I would call the Victims' Right Bill, which was a 2008 amendment to the California Constitution. Some of the rights that we talk a lot about are a victim's right to address a judge when the safety of a victim is up for discussion, so at a bail hearing or upon the release of a defendant. We talk about a victim's right to know what's happening in the court, so what's happening with the case, when the next court date is, and their right to be present. And then finally, we talk a lot about the right to restitution.
Now, when you're talking about their rights, do you offer, is this somewhat like a legal help for them, or is that totally different? Do you help them with the legal part of that?
Oh, heavens no.
Okay, okay.
We're not attorneys, we're not paralegals, but what we do is we talk about them, we educate the community about what rights are available, and then we make sure that we're also talking to the deputy district attorneys who are working these cases to make sure that they can help enforce victims' rights when needed.
So you're a support system
Exactly.
for that victim, and it's good to know that victims aren't alone. That's got to be extremely scary.
Yes.
If nobody has anybody to go to court with them,
Yes.
you're there with them. How does somebody qualify to get this help?
Well, that's a great question. When I think about qualifying, I think about 2 different things. So to qualify for services through the Victim Services Division, what I would say is you have to have just been a victim of a crime. So that would mean that if you were a victim of a crime, I could provide you with crisis intervention. I could link you up with community resources depending on what you need. And I can, educate you about the criminal justice process or whatever. To qualify for the Victim Compensation Program, which is something that we talk a lot about as well in our work as victim advocates, you must be a resident of California, or the crime has had to have happened in California.
Okay.
The crime has to have been violent or have a threat of violence. So human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual abuse, homicides. So violence or a threat of violence.
I know right now we just saw news clippings of somebody getting a necklace ripped off of them, like a mugging.
Yes.
Does that fall under that as well?
No. That's, well,
Okay.
yes and no.
Okay.
Excuse me. What I would say is for a victim of a mugging, if they wanted to seek mental health services, so if they wanted to go see a counselor, yes, they would qualify for victim compensation. But for the value of their necklace, it's unlikely
Sure.
that that program would be able to help them.
So you can set up victims with therapy, with
Yes.
with doctors, and this is something, if you go through, unfortunately, if you go through something like that and it leaves you with a lot of mental anguish,
Yes.
some mental disabilities, that could be a long time for healing. Do you cover all of that? Do you help with all of that?
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
So the victim compensation program, if you are approved for services as a result of a crime, so a victim of domestic violence might be eligible for up to 40 sessions of mental health therapy through a therapist of their choice.
Good to know.
It can be more than 40 sessions if the therapist believes that there is a need for that. Additionally, if there are medical expenses related to the crime, the victim would be able to request up to $70,000 worth of reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses.
Wow. And there are qualifications.
Yes. So as I mentioned, there's the violent crime aspect. You have to have been in California or be a California resident. You cannot have been participating in the crime. And you should be cooperating with law enforcement and the DA's office.
Have you had to turn people away because they have not qualified? That's got to be very hard as well.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to say no, but what I always tell victims that I meet is I want you to try. If you want to access these services, let's try, and I'll fight for you if we have a good reason. Applications have to be submitted within 3 years of the date of the crime, with some exceptions. And sometimes people aren't ready to deal with the aftermath
Sure.
until 5 or 7 years later, in which case then an advocate would help them navigate the finer details of the victim compensation program to get assistance.
You brought up something good that struck a question with me. Is there a statute of limitations for wanting to seek out help?
No. So if you are approved for victim compensation, the mental health sessions are good for a lifetime, as long as it's crime related. And then basically any costs that we can associate with the crime. So if you had an ongoing medical event that you need to care for a number of years down the road, as long as we can prove that it's part of the crime or as a result of the crime, there's no limitation.
Now, I read on your website that you offer help if a crime is committed outside of the state lines.
Yes.
If I'm visiting another state and I unfortunately get into some kind of dilemma or issue like that, or trouble, you do help with that?
We do. So because the program focuses on, because Cal VCB focuses on victims who either are California residents or if the crime occurred here, a resident of California would likely be able to receive assistance through Cal VCB, victim compensation. We would also, as advocates, try to connect you with the other state victim compensation programs. So if you were in Nevada, I would reach out to that program and help figure out what the rules are to apply for that program as well.
Do you have to be a U.S. citizen?
No.
No. Okay.
No. So there are rights afforded to all individuals. So what I mean by that is everybody has a right to be free from abuse, threats.
Shouldn't matter who you are.
Right, exactly. And so from California Victim Compensation's viewpoint, it doesn't matter if a person is a legal citizen. From my office's standpoint, I'm still going to serve you and do what I can to help you through the process that you're going through. And I'm going to definitely be referring you out for specialty services to see if we can help you with whatever your needs are, regardless of what your status is.
So getting back to the mugging with the necklace, personal property, identity theft, somebody steals your car, you are a victim of that crime. Does that fall under qualifications for you?
It falls under our ability to serve a victim of crime as the Victim Services Division. And what I mean by that is we can have an advocate assist the victim whose necklace was taken with compiling the right documents to get a restitution order from a judge, which would hold the defendant accountable for paying for the cost of the necklace or the contents of the vehicle or the laptop
that was stolen. Now,
Yes.
it's also important to point out that the suspect that committed the crime has to be caught for the victim to
Absolutely.
get a help, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for that distinction. I would say also that we have to have a suspect caught and we need to make sure that there's a criminal case. If there isn't, my advocates can absolutely provide resources and referrals. So if it was somebody's purse and it had their rent assistance or their rent for the month, they might be able to connect them with somebody who helps with rental assistance in the county. So we will do what we can to serve a victim regardless of if there's a criminal case or not.
Do you have a recent example of a victim that you have assisted that you can share with us?
Yeah, so a husband and father of 2 young girls was killed in a DUI traffic collision.
Gosh.
His wife was referred to our office from the law enforcement agency who was investigating. And our victim advocate was able to provide crisis intervention, supportive services, and assistance with the Cal VCB application. So she was able to receive assistance with funeral and burial expenses up to $7,500, which
that was helpful.
helps. Absolutely. And then the victim advocate supported the victim from the beginning of the criminal case all the way to the end at sentencing, where the victim was able to provide an impact statement to talk to the judge about how the crime has impacted the family.
Oh.
And the victim and the advocate still remain in contact even after the case is ended.
How are they doing now?
They're doing well. They're figuring out what life looks like without their husband and father, but they're absolutely on the right path to at least figuring out what their new normal is.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to help them.
Yes,
It's a sad situation.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. Elisa, well, thank you so much for being an advocate for all of the victims out there. And it's good to know that these services are available if a victim needs it.
Yes.
Hopefully, you or a loved one is never a victim of a violent crime. But if you are, please report it to the police. As you've heard today, there is help for victims. And for more information about victim services that the county offers, call 650-599-7479. I'm Lisa Charney. Thank you for tuning in to Take Notice, and have a safe day.